In this video, we are going to cover how to give users access to the AWS console and account. We will go over what is the root account versus user accounts. We'll talk about how to add users, apply permissions and policies to those users, and best practices for managing groups of users. Let's get into it. In our repo, you'll see we have some basics here about some of the underlying whys and hows to create users using IAM, that is Identity and Access Management in AWS, as well as some best practices for managing groups of users and applying policies to those groups. Through this, we will also discuss some considerations as far as how to monitor your users using CloudTrail logs and how to set up those log trails. Okay. In the console, I have signed in as the root user, which gives me access to administer the account as needed. We're going to talk a little bit about some best practices with the root user as well as things to watch out for. In my IAM dashboard at this point in time, you can see that it's giving me some security recommendations up top here. One, it is a best practice to turn on the multi-factor authentication for the root user. And it is also a best practice to deactivate or delete user keys for that root user. So I'm showing you that there are some recommendations for you to follow right up top when you establish your AWS account. It gives you a little bit of an overview of how many users, how many user groups you've got created, how many users, different roles and policies. And so we're going to go ahead and create a couple of these and apply some permissions and policies to a user in a group. So over on the left side, I've got a user group, okay? And you can see that when I have a user group, let me just, I'll go over here and click into EC2 support. And you'll see under EC2 support, that's the group name, I have a particular user that's been added to this group, okay? Under permissions, it shows that at this time, this set of users within this group only is being given permission to be an EC2 read-only access user. So in there, you can see that this is the JSON for that. Okay, if I go back over to user groups to show you something a little different, I have a Terraform user group. There are two users, MSKK and Dev Kelly. Under that permissions, you'll notice that we have added quite a few policies in order for this particular group to be able to execute Terraform scripts. So in there we have RDS full access, EC2 full access, IAM full access, S3, DynamoDB, and Route 53 full access. Now, when you're using Terraform scripts, which we'll get to a little bit later in this course, you're going to be creating resources in your AWS account using code. And so for that, those users need specific permissions in order to create those resources. And so you can see that for this particular user group, they would need full access to create RDS instances, EC2 instances, S3 buckets, and so forth. All right, under roles, you can see that there are a number of pre-built roles, okay? And so with these are akin to service accounts that can be allowed different services to have permissions to interact with other services within your AWS console, okay? And so I have one called EC2 S3. And so this gives permission for Amazon S3 full access, so full bucket access, okay? And I can assign this role to an EC2 instance so that they have that permission, okay? Policies are, it's an AWS object that just kind of defines some permissions kind of grouped together. So let's take a look at a policy. I'll say EC2 region restriction. And this is a custom policy that I created. And you'll see that this is to allow EC2 instances to be created in a specific, let's see what we've got here. specific parameter, okay? And so here we have the IAM permission boundary, and that is there is a region restriction. Let's go back over to policies and check out another one. All right, I can also search, and we can see the different policies that are available for S3 buckets. And so if I have S3 read-only access or S3 storage lens service role, we can go in and we can start to see the different permissions that are part of this policy. And so the actions that I can take, this particular policy, S3 read-only access, has been assigned to my user account, then I have the ability to get, list, and then also get and list S3 objects from there as well. So this allows me to just basically read from that bucket, right? And then from here, when we have these policies, you can create your own policies. You can start to augment, create policies from scratch. You can start to create policies from some of these pre-built AWS managed policies and go from there. All right. Now, when we are working with users and groups, it is a best policy, it's a best practice, right? Whether you are working with your research group, your lab, maybe you have a research team that you're working with in various locations. What we want to do is we want to create sets of policies that go together and then assign those sets of policies to that entity that has similar needs for function. Now, it's best practice to not have this set of policies and assign all of these policies to each user. That would be redundant and wasteful in time management. It's best practice to then declare a user group and then add users to that user group and assign the policies to that group. So let's see what this looks like. I'll create a group. Okay, we've got research team 22. And now I have users already as part of my account. So I can go ahead and say, yep, we're going to add these users to this group. And from here, now I can say, okay, what policies do we need, right? So we talked about those S3 policies. And so let's give bucket access. We'll give some read-only access. I'm going to give full access right now, okay? All right, so we've checked that box. I'm going to clear the filter out. I'm going to go ahead and do EKS. Okay. At this point, now I think I might need to, as part of my team, if I'm deploying Kubernetes clusters, or if I'm working with those containerized workloads, I need to be able to have access to EKS. So we're going to go ahead and do some worker node policies and cluster policies. And maybe I'll leave it there right now, just as our example. Okay, so from here, it's really good to note that I have selected 3. So it didn't go away when I was changing my filtering. My S3 choices still remained, my EKS choices still remained. So I have selected 3 policies to apply to this group. And I can go ahead and hit create group. And now I've got my research team 22. If I look inside, I'll see the different users that have been added to this group. And subsequently, by adding them to this group, they all inherit the permissions that I have applied to this group. So it makes, when you have those research groups or teams in your lab teams, that it makes it the management of the permissions much easier in that group fashion.